Welcome to the Produce Moms Podcast, where we believe there is a produce mom in all of us. I'm Lori Taylor, founder and CEO of the Produce Moms. For 10 years, I sold fresh produce to over 300 grocery stores in the U.S. And today, my team and I are fully focused on inspiring people to eat more fruits and vegetables. This show is just one of the ways that we hope to inspire you and your family to eat more produce and live a better life. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, join our community of almost 40,000 in all 50 states and over 30 countries by visiting theproducemoms.com/subscribe. And be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks for being here. Enjoy today's show. Welcome back, everyone. This is the Produce Moms Podcast. My name is Lori Taylor. Today's guest, man, she is a superstar, a woman that I have had the pleasure of getting to know really over just the last year or so. I mean, Vonnie Estes, she is the Vice President of Technology at the Produce Marketing Association. She's done a lot, a tremendous amount for our industry. And she most recently was on stage at CES, which is just an experience unlike any other. I was very blessed and fortunate and proud to be in attendance when Vonnie took the stage at CES to talk about robotics and technology in agriculture. It was amazing. And this woman is a true force. I mean, she owned that stage at CES, the lone female on stage, and she is here today as our guest. And we're going to just really dive in to ag tech, the questions that I have, the questions that I know our followers have. It's going to be a great conversation. Vonnie, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to speak with you.
Oh, thank you. No, I love your work, and I'm so thankful that our paths have crossed. I just view you as one of the most brilliant minds of all the people that I have had the pleasure of meeting in my journey with the Produce Mom. So I really look forward to this conversation. I know I'm going to learn a lot. I know our listeners are too. So this is going to be great. I think, Vonnie, we need to just start at the top. What is ag tech?
Well, I think ag tech has as many definitions as sustainability has and a lot of these other words that people start using. But the way that I look at it is that really thinking about when did digitization start in agriculture? Like when did that come into the way that we grow crops? And that was probably with using, putting a GPS on a John Deere tractor in 1990. So that's when I would say it started. And then it moved to variable rate technology, being able to only put the amount of inputs where you want them exactly at what time you want them. And so I think that's kind of how we've moved on to using digital technologies in the way that we grow crops.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. No, that's great. And Vonnie, tell us a little bit more about your background. I mean, how did you land where you're at today, being the Vice President of Technology for PMA and truthfully one of the global leaders and just a true thought leader on all things technology and agriculture?
Oh, thanks. It's a really long story, so I won't give you each step of the way.
Cliff notes. Yeah.
Cliff notes. Educationally, I have a bachelor's in horticulture and a master's from UC Davis in plant pathology. So I realized really early that I loved science, but I wasn't the best scientist. What I really loved doing was figuring out what scientists were doing and then applying it in the field to make people's lives better in agriculture. So that's kind of where I started. And I've always worked on that edge of what are scientists working on? What do people in the field need? And how can I help be the navigator to bring technology into the field? So I've done that in crop genetics. I've done that in a number of different kinds of crop inputs. I've worked for large companies like Syngenta and DuPont. I've worked for a number of startups and a number of VCs. So I've kind of worked across the whole business chain of crop inputs and how we use technology in growing. I was a consultant for a couple of years before I got this call from Bob Whitaker, who I worked with my very first job out of graduate school very many years ago at DNA Plant Technologies. And he said, we're looking for this great new role in PMA, and I think you'd be great for it. And we talked about it, and I met Kathy Burns, and we talked about it. And so that's how I ended up at PMA, which was, if you'd asked me 3 years ago, are you going to go work for PMA? That would not have been at the top of my list. But I tell you, the opportunity of being able to work with people throughout the whole supply chain has just been amazing. And, do that globally. It's really been a great gift.
Yeah. And I will attest to the fact that everyone at CES knew Vonnie. It was crazy. So she really, all this background, this Cliff Note version, I think you were being extremely humble. But thank you for the background on your story. And I want to actually dive in now to that CES panel. It really, for me, I learned so much, and it was really cool because you were on stage with, industries that farmers don't necessarily think, and produce industry professionals don't necessarily think we might share the stage with. I mean, you're up there with huge car manufacturing companies, and it was amazing. So let's talk about robotics and why robotics are so important to modern day agriculture.
Well, I was really nervous about that panel because they were like experts in robotics. And that, obviously from what I just said is not my background, but what I learned being on this stage with, like you said, there's a guy from a car company and then a guy that does a lot of robotic work inside manufacturing plants. What I realized in speaking with them on the panel and listening to them is that we're all kind of at the same stage in robotics. Like no one's got it all figured out. We're not a world of robots, obviously. And everyone's trying to look at how can we improve people's lives so that the really backbreaking, dirty, dangerous work can be done with robotics, with people right along with them, using their wisdom and their knowledge to help to design the robotics to do that kind of work that, people don't really want to do. So I think that was a really interesting thing to learn is a lot of how we're gathering data, how we're using data, how we're building robots. And, you think that car companies are so much further ahead than agriculture. They're not, they're just trying to figure it out too. Right. So I think as far as looking in agriculture and food production right now, there's a lot of robotics that have been in packing houses for a long time. You go into the packing houses and you have that robotic arm that's moving things around. And so that's been happening for a while. I think where we're seeing more work now is in the field around harvesting and pruning and some of the autonomous vehicles that are carry things around in the field. And so that's, you see a lot of people talking about that, but especially around harvesters, there's still a lot of work to be done because especially if it's something that you have to touch, robots don't know how hard to squeeze. So if they're like grabbing strawberries, they're crushing them. And so really trying to figure out how do you teach a robot how to pick a strawberry and not hurt it, or a tomato. So it's really important. I think we're making huge strides, and I've talked to a lot of companies that are working on it, but we're not going to see just all robots in the field anytime soon.
No. Well, I mean, and as someone, I think probably from a consumer standpoint, that human element, they want that with farming, so I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, I also, every farmer I know and have the pleasure of working with it's one of their number one pain points is labor, so we got to figure something out, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, and again, we want to replace the jobs that we don't have people to fill right now, like you
100%.
You talk about, you talk about people, wanting, they say, oh, we shouldn't be replacing people in the fields, but we, as we don't have enough people to do that labor, and that's only going to get harder and harder. And no, like I said, no one wants to be bending over all day. So let's have them do other, higher value jobs that, don't tear up their bodies so much.
Correct. Yeah, for sure. So, the rise of technology is really exciting for the United States, for the world, for agriculture. I want to make sure that we get your thoughts on this. It was something that you and I discussed during our pre-show conversation, Vonnie, and that is, technology is a great thing. Like, how is this going to be such a positive thing for smaller scale farms? And not just, siloed and benefiting, like your big ag operations?
I think one of the greatest benefits, especially in our industry, in the produce industry, is really the ability to have a digital footprint. Everyone can have a digital footprint. Everyone can get, their college age son or daughter to put up a website for them. And now we've got the situation where so many consumers really want to know where their food is coming from. They want to know that farmer. They want to see a picture of the land. Now, smaller farmers can do that. And it really is creating that link with the consumer, which, they couldn't have done without technology. So I think that's one way that is really exciting, that really, makes that connection between the consumers and the food that they eat, which is, good for the whole industry. I think another way that technology is really good for smaller growers is just the ability to do software programs, office type software programs, managing your accounts, managing your workers, just the office type of work. I was talking to one of our smaller growers in Chile a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about how, a lot of the people in Chile that he works with, they're still using notebooks to try to, keep track of any information on their growing operation. And he said, if I could just help them all use software programs, it would increase their efficiency. So I think that's one of the biggest things for smaller growers, even when you get out into the field, is that as we get, sensors that are cheaper, and as we get more technology in the field that's less expensive, and they can see a return on investment, because of course they're not going to buy it if they don't see a return on investment, but it's going to help them be more efficient. It's going to tell them you don't need to water as much. You don't need as many crop inputs. Maybe you could plant seeds here. So it's really going to allow them to be more sustainable and more effective and efficient in their operations going forward.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And as you're talking, and then also what was reinforced to me when we were together at CES is, just broadband in rural America. And this is not the first time we've talked about this concept on the Produce Moms podcast. If you go back in the archives, episode 29, we had one of the executives from Microsoft came on the show. And we talked about drones, AI, farmers, and what Microsoft is doing to empower agriculture. And they went on record by saying, you can't farm without broadband. Like that's the number one, that is the number one roadblock. And, so while you can't go anywhere, I mean, I was just watching the Super Bowl or commercials or, opening up my Facebook feed and there's advertisements promoting 5G. And, there's a huge percentage of America's farmers that have no connectivity. So let's talk a little bit about that, Vonnie, if you're comfortable doing so. What is your perspective on broadband in rural America and how it's affecting the technology in ag?
So if you first start and look at what 5G and kind of why it's being developed and what it is, and a lot of people say, 5G really isn't anywhere right now. So it's not going to be on the farm right away, but 5G is really being developed for places like airports and stadiums where there are people standing very close together and it's kind of more open space. And it's been developed for you to stream your movies or do video calls. And it's more about downloading onto your phone. And so lots of people in one place downloading to your phone. So the opposite is what we need on the farm, right? We need, we've got things, very large spaces. We're going to be more uploading information to the cloud to be analyzed. So it's a separate direction of flow of data. And 5G also doesn't go around trees. Like if you've got a tree between you and the sensor, it won't go around it. So that's a problem. And it also goes very short distances. So you'd have to have a repeater like every 300 meters is as far as 5G can go. So all those do not work in farming. Like none of that's going to work. So why you would even want 5G, the thing that will at some point, that type of technology, whether it's 5G or something else that we leapfrog, is that you have there's no slowdown. It's a matter of seconds between the time information flows back and forth and analytics are done. So if you were trying to sit in your office and tell your robot to analyze something out in the field and do something right away. Like, okay, right now, don't water that, or right now, don't water that, or you needed this communication with no latency. A good example of that is people are looking at using 5G in hospitals. So they're actually doing the surgery. Well, you can't have a lag. Like if you're in there, cutting open a muscle or something, you can't have a lag. So that's what 5G does. So it's going to be super powerful in a lot of different places, but it's going to be a long time because it's on the farm, mostly because of the huge long distances that we have. So there's a lot of other, and as you said, there's a lot of different numbers depending on how you count it, but the number I've heard is there's 35% of rural America has no connectivity at all, and 60% of the farmers, if you ask them, is your connectivity that you have good enough to run your business, they'll say no. So even if they have a little bit, it's like us trying to make a phone call, driving in certain areas, it just keeps dropping. So they can't really do their business if they keep losing connection.
Right.
So I think there are a lot of, just putting 5G aside, because I think that's a long ways away and it's going to have its own inherent problems. But just looking at 3G and 4G, if we could get, that broadband activity and onto the farm, and then we'll be able to do a lot more. And it's an issue. One thing I was talking to a friend of mine about that does some work with AWS, Amazon, is that there are ways of putting servers on the farm, and they do this. AWS is doing this in places like mines where you're not going to have connectivity down in a mine, right? So you can actually put banks of servers in different places in rural America that the analytics can be done there. It's called edge computing. So you can there are some ways around it. So there's a lot of really smart people, like you said, Microsoft and IBM. Is looking at this, and Google is looking at this. There's a lot of smart people. So this will get solved. It's just, we have to be a little patient.
Yeah. And while it was my first experience at CES this year, for attendees that have, been there for many years in the past or always attend, the buzz amongst several of the folks I talked to is, wow, farming and agriculture has a heightened presence at CES. And, I think your panel was a testament to that, Vonnie. So yeah, it's really exciting what the future holds. And thanks for sharing those data points too. That's really powerful to help put it into perspective like that, All right. So I can't have you on the show without asking you the number one thing that people ask us at the Produce Moms. All right. So as it relates to your wheelhouse, and that is absolutely, there's a lot of consumer confusion about biotechnology, genetic engineering. Are all of these GMOs? What is a GMO? Why do they exist, et cetera? So I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Like, let's maybe just start with, can you define biotechnology, genetic engineering, and GMO? Definition of biotechnology, using technology in biological systems is, a big overview, as I would say, because it's also used in pharma. It's used, biocomputing a lot. Yeah. And so a lot of it is using technology and tools that may not be considered natural, like killing cancer. It's not natural. We're finding ways to kill cancer. It's not natural. It's technology. Right. So that's what I would say about biotech. And then genetic modification, I'll just try to give you, again, the cliff notes of kind of background, and I know there's so much confusion about it. So genetic modification using tools to genetically modify. I mean, as you know, we've always done plant breeding, but using tools to change the DNA of a plant cell started in big scale in the 90s. And so what we were trying to do then is there was two different traits that we were working on at the time, and that was Roundup Ready, which was to allow people to spray herbicide over their crop and not kill it. And then another one was to insert an insecticide gene so that when the bug came in to eat the plant wouldn't die. So those are the two kind of biggest genes, were herbicide resistance and bug resistance. And those were the technologies that we used and the techniques that we used. We were putting foreign DNA into the plant cells.
And that's what people mostly didn't like, because they, rightly so, it's like, we don't understand that. You're asking us to eat something and we don't understand it. But it was regulated and is regulated by USDA, EPA, and FDA. So these are highly regulated events that lots of tests have been done on. And right now, 90% of scientists think that GMOs are safe, including the American Medical Association and National Academy of Sciences. And if you really think about it, we in the U.S. have been eating genetically modified food, since the 90s. 60% of processed food on the grocery shelf has some kind of genetically modified thing in it. So,
sure.
So that's one thing. It's like, okay, there's those, and those are mostly the broadacre crops. So that's corn and soy and canola and some cotton. So that, though, because it used to be so expensive and take so long, I can't remember the numbers right now, but at least 10 to 15 years to get something on the market, and, millions and, hundreds of millions of dollars to go through all the regulatory process. So only the big companies and only the big crops could do that. So that's the path. That's how we kind of got where we are. So right now, when you look at, as a produce industry, what do we have that's genetically modified? Again, because in the past it was so expensive, no one would do it with our crops. But we have three if you count the papaya. We have really three crops that are kind of on the market right now that have been genetically modified using that terminology and those definitions of GMO. And so one is a potato that's genetically modified to not brown when it's cut. And it also has some other really great traits in it that help with sustainability. And that's being sold to food service. You can't really buy that in the store. And then the other one,
available at grocery stores. Definitely want to make sure that folks understand that. And it's called the innate potato, correct?
Yeah, it's a simplex potato.
Yeah. Okay.
And then Arctic apple is the other one that is traditionally genetically modified. They're very, very open about it. And it, again, has been genetically modified to not brown. So, again, there's a great sustainability story about not throwing away those apples because they got a little brown in the kids' lunch, or they got a little brown in the food service display. So you will not buy an Arctic apple without knowing it. They're labeled and marked, and they're not. It takes a long time to grow an apple tree, so they're not available everywhere. So so those are the two, and then the papaya. Everyone's heard about the papaya story in Hawaii, that the whole industry was about to die from a virus. And I'm not sure how many years ago this was. Do you remember 20, 30 years ago? It's a long time ago. But they went in and they made a resistant strain of papaya to the virus, and it saved the industry. And so the papayas, all the papayas that come from Hawaii are genetically modified. There are some, I think the ones that come from Mexico probably are not, but that's a really great story. I mean, it saved an industry. And so that's kind of the traditional GMO, and those are now going to be labeled in stores. So they'll have a sticker on them. And so, people will know what they're getting. The other piece, so they're
labeled. Expand on that just a little bit, if you don't mind, Vonnie. Labeling like the same way we have the federal cool labeling law, where you have to declare country of origin. Is there a new labeling protocol surrounding GMO, or is this something that's always existed?
This is just starting, and it'll have, and there's all sorts of different carve outs, and I need to be careful because it's a bill, it's a law, and so I don't want to misstate it, and I don't know everything about every detail, but if you're only a certain percent of the ingredients, then you don't have to label. So there's a lot of like the corn and soy that are ingredients in other foods, they're not going to have to be necessarily labeled. But when you're an apple, or you're a potato, then it's pretty obvious that that's the ingredients, right? So
right.
And so there'll be stickers, so like if if Simplot starts selling them in stores, there'll be a sticker on it that that tells you that it's bioengineered. I think it says BE is the sticker, and that's happening now. There's different phases of what size of grocery you are and when you have to phase in the labeling. But it's not. I know that people think so many things are GMOs, and they're not. And so those are the three. Counting the papaya, those are the three that are available at this point.
And really, there's only one that's available in produce departments out of those three that you listed. The Arctic apple there's hundreds of varieties of apples. There's only one that is the GMO apple, and that is Arctic apple. Like Vonnie said, they're very transparent and have, it's great to know that those labels are going to be on all the products so that, hopefully we can minimize that consumer confusion and increase consumer confidence. Yeah.
So people can make a choice, and they'll have, they can go, like with the Arctic apple, they can go to the website and really understand, the science behind it and the tests that have been done on it. And, they can make their own choice.
Right. Well, it's been such a great conversation, Vonnie. You're a wealth of knowledge on all things ag tech, and you really are a thought leader within your field. We are very fortunate to have you as one of our produce industry leaders at PMA. What do you want consumers to know? Like, any closing thoughts for today's show? What's the one takeaway you want folks to know about ag technology?
So the one thing that I want to really, and this is a start of a crusade for me, is to really get people to think about technology in their food. And I think most of the people that are listening to this podcast are listening to it on a smartphone or a smart speaker. So the technology is in their lives. They're not people that are afraid of technology, but there is this fear of technology in their food. And I really want people to understand and dig a little bit deeper about what does it mean to have technology in the food, and that it's not bad. We are trying to feed a healthy world. We're trying to get people to eat better, especially with our products, even the most. And we're trying to do it in a sustainable way that takes care of the planet as well. And we're trying to feed more people. And the climate is changing. And so when you've got all those different factors, we have to use technology. We can't have your grandmother, hand-picking every piece of food in her backyard, and that's the way people get to eat. We have to be able to produce food in a way that we can be efficient and sustainable. And I worry so much, when people are talking about everything is done, in an organic way and in a way that one person is touching things, is that becomes a very elitist conversation. Like, that food cannot be made affordable to the masses. So what I really want people to think about is, think about where your food comes from and think about what matters to you. A lot of people, if you really care about regenerative ag and regenerating the soil and sustainability, organic may not be the best choice. You have to think about how things are being grown and what technologies that we're using. And genetic engineering is another one. If you could, within 5 years, have a crop that can grow in a place that otherwise it couldn't grow anymore because it's too hot and dry there, that's really good. That's really good for everybody. So think about, what technology we're using and the other things that you care about, health and sustainability. So that would be my closing thoughts.
That was amazing. Well, thank you, Vonnie, for being our guest on the show today. Everyone, please connect with Vonnie on LinkedIn. Vonnie Estes, she shares a lot of, just great articles, and shares a lot of her amazing thoughts too on this topic. And Vonnie, thank you so much for being our guest on today's show.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's always great to talk to you, Lori.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Produce Moms Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a featured guest, just send an email to lori@theproducemoms.com. We know there is a produce mom in you because there's a produce mom in all of us. Join our community on Facebook and all social platforms. Help us change the way America eats. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.